as we go from one crisis to the other is the assault on our elections. And the left doesn't like the idea. I mean, if you think it's just bad here in Washington, you're wrong. The rule of law is under assault throughout the nation. And many states, I think 37 or 38, have a type of voter ID law. Some are better than others. Most people agree with voter ID. Don't believe what the left tells you. It's not race-based, blacks, whites, whatever. Everyone agrees and likes voter ID. Not literally everyone, but large majorities do. And so to make up for that, the left plays the race card to suggest that voter ID is designed to suppress minority voting. And Alabama, and there's no evidence of that. And Alabama has a voter ID law that was upheld by the lower court. And I'll explain to you a little bit about the court process as best as I'm able. So when you go into federal court, you go before, initially, usually, a U.S. District Court judge. That's kind of the first layer. So Judge Ellis, who I talked about, that's a U.S. District Court judge. And if you don't like whatever rulings they make, at the appropriate time and place, you can appeal it, and that's when you go to the appellate court. And that's when you hear appeals courts. And more or less, if you don't like what an appeals court does, you can kick it upstairs to the Supreme Court. So there are essentially three layers of review. Now, I know you lawyers out there, there are all sorts of buts and caveats. I know them. I know what the caveats are. I know what the exceptions are. I'm just going generally here. In the case of this voter ID law, the district court upheld it, and it's now before the 11th Circuit in Alabama. So these appellate courts, essentially, the courts are divided into circuits. So there's the 11th Circuit, which covers the Southeast. Here in the District of Columbia, it has its own special circuit. It's the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Columbia. California, infamously, is part of the 9th Circuit. You've probably heard about the 9th Circuit. New York is the 2nd Circuit. New England, I think, is the 1st Circuit. So that's how the courts are divvied up. So the 11th Circuit is hearing this appeal of a ruling that the left lost, challenging the Alabama voter ID. And essentially, the left is trying to make the argument that if one person of color is hurt by a voter ID law, it necessarily has to be knocked out. And the courts don't take that as a point of, that's not what the law is. The law is, look, you gotta have, you need to know for sure that the law caused the harm to the minorities at issue here. There's to be a direct causal relationship under this disparate impact theory, as I like to call it, which I think generally is bunk. Because you could have a neutral law that may adversely affect minorities, but is still a good and constitutional rational law. Now, if you pass a law to specifically target minorities and deny them equal treatment of the law, obviously that's not good and it should be shunted aside. But that's not the issue here. As we point out, voter ID protects all races. It's applied equally across the board. It's not designed to stop anyone from voting because of their race. It's designed to make sure that only people eligible to vote are allowed to vote. So we filed this amicus brief before the 5th Circuit with our friends at the Allied Educational Foundation, asking them to uphold the Alabama voter ID law. Now, the good news is, under the Obama administration, the radicals running the Justice Department were challenging voter ID laws across the country. And obviously that's changed with Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. There's good news there for the Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. But the left-wing interest groups are challenging voter ID laws still. They did it in Texas, they're doing it here in Alabama. And so Judicial Watch filed this amicus brief with AEF. And I encourage you to go online and read it, but I want to give you a big picture thing here. There are I think a handful of groups on the right who share our values. I can think of 3. Handful of lawyers who are expert in this area who are trying to defend voter ID laws. The left has legions of lawyers on the other side, dozens of groups. This is a major focus of the George Soros network that you've heard about. His funding focuses heavily on this. The left is focused heavily on upending voter election integrity measures like voter ID. And I know they're fighting us in court elsewhere because Judicial Watch has this major election integrity project where we are pushing states to follow federal law and make sure their voting rolls are accurate by taking reasonable steps to make sure that dead people are removed from the rolls, that people who move away are removed from the rolls, and other ineligible people are removed from the rolls, such as illegal aliens or legal aliens who aren't allowed to vote in federal elections. And that's not the case in many states across the country. We found we had to warn at least 12 states. We've sued Kentucky because they're one of the worst. And we just sued California and Los Angeles because they have, in many places in California, more people on the rolls than are actually living there and eligible to vote. That's a pretty good indication they're not taking steps necessary to clean up the rolls. In fact, in California, I don't think they ever really remove anyone. They call them inactive, which means you just show up and vote. Doesn't make a difference. But you're still on the rolls, so you can come in and vote in someone else's name, and there's not much to check you from doing that, including the names of dead people. I mean, that's our concern. That's why we want the rolls cleaned up. And I know in the California case, a group of leftist groups are trying to intervene to defend the lack of election integrity in California. So the left has a lot of forces arrayed against the rule of law, and I'm convinced the left wants to be able to steal elections if necessary. They would have you believe there's no voter fraud and just close your eyes and go back to sleep. But we know there are a lot of close elections in this country, and voter fraud does happen, and it happens in sufficient amounts to change the outcome of elections. But separately, the American people have a right to expect from their government that elections are conducted in a way that protect against fraud, so it doesn't become a joke to participate in elections. So that's what should be happening here. We need voter ID. We need states to make sure their rolls are clean. And frankly, we need to go to the next step and make sure there is citizenship verification for people seeking to vote. Yes, citizenship verification. We have tens of millions of aliens living here in the United States, both legal and illegal, who aren't eligible to vote, yet studies show are on election rolls and do vote in numbers large enough to affect the outcome of elections. So Judicial Watch is against stolen elections. We're for clean elections. And we're fighting the left every day on this. And it's a significant issue for Judicial Watch. You don't hear the politicians in Washington talking about it. Whenever they talk about it, it's a left-wing politician defaming those who want voter ID by suggesting they have racist intentions and making sure elections aren't dirty. So, I know it's just one filing we made, this amicus brief, but it's part of a comprehensive effort by Judicial Watch to protect election integrity.